basically, I think it's gonna be Carl, Negan, Bloat, and maybe spin-offs. Because I do feel like the spin-offs, with how many there are, it's sort of like... I've talked about this before, but it's sort of the whole oversaturation of the market, right? That you don't really want to do. There's a reason why scarcity is very good. People use scarcity all the time. People like scarcity, even though they don't think they do. But scarcity is very, very good. All right, let me get this. And I guess without further ado, let's jump right in. It's sad, Rick. Spoilers. Yes, spoilers, obviously. I will spoil everything.
It's weird to think there used to be a time where The Walking Dead was my favorite show on television. It feels very distant now, but I used to be a massive fan of this show. I started watching it around
I wonder if he's read the books.
I think when season 3 was airing, and I was just obsessed, like a lot of people. It's easy to forget, but in 2013, The Walking Dead was one of the biggest phenomenons in pop culture.
It was.
Like, this show was a big deal.
This was funny, right? Because unfortunately, no one where I lived really talked about it. So it was only like my small group of friends. For some reason, here in Latvia, I feel like I think a lot of people still watched it, but a lot of people didn't really talk about it, right? So it wasn't a case of me always going somewhere and hearing people talk about it. It was mostly just my small group of friends. But I know that in like other places, it was literally like the thing you talk about on a Monday in the office. So. Especially in the US, I would assume.
Or both. And
yes.
What everybody was talking
both.
About. Even in my own circle, it was the biggest thing. We would do giant watch parties every single week, reuniting friends, family members from different generations, parents, brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, nephews, cousins, you name it. It was an event every Sunday night.
It was.
And around season 5, The Walking Dead was the most watched television series in the world. The audience numbers it would pull every week were
hold on.
Success seemed impossible to slow down. It was a hit unlike anything we'd seen before. Until it wasn't.
Yes.
In my opinion, and in the opinion of many, The Walking Dead is the perfect A-grade example of a show that widely overstayed its welcome. It's a show that gambled a little too much with its audience.
So this is, like, I know we're in the intro and I've already stopped like 50 times. This is what I said, right? The fact that it just went on too long. And I don't think it's a case of the story going on too long. I think it's the fact that they just stretched out the story too much. Spoilers for the upcoming video. I've already mentioned it before, right? The fact that like 16 episodes is just too much for a season of The Walking Dead. And I think that was a big thing, especially going forward when we had like season 10. Season 10 was obviously an exception because we had like the whole COVID thing there, and then they had to sort of shoot on a smaller budget and everything, so we had 22 episodes there. Season 11 did not need to be that long, like not by any stretch. The fact that it was so long and still so many things were unresolved is crazy to me. It's crazy to me. Let's keep going.
Refused to quit while it was ahead, and now the entirety of The Walking Dead as a franchise feels like a pale shadow of its former self, and more importantly, it feels like a pale shadow at what it could have been. Because, yeah, when you really take a look at it, it's hard to deny that this show had somewhat of a historical downfall. I've been wanting to talk about The Walking Dead on the channel for a very long time, but I always wanted to wait for the show to be over, which is something that felt impossible a couple of years ago.
Oh, when? When will it end?
The Walking Dead was
I mean, to be fair, it's still not over. It's still not over. Like, to be fair. I mean, the main series is, but like, not really, right? Hello, zombie. Spooky zombies.
Things out, but last November, after 11 very long seasons, it did, in fact, end. And I've been sitting with some thoughts ever since I watched the series finale, and I want to talk about it because I think the end of The Walking Dead illustrates an issue that has been bugging a lot of people as of late, even internet idiots like me. And I think it's interesting to try and examine what is probably considered to be the greatest fall from grace in television history. But before we do that, I think...
Is it the greatest fall? I would say the greatest fall is still Game of Thrones. I would say that The Walking Dead fizzled out And that's obviously a lot more sad, right? Just watching it slowly wither away year over year. But Game of Thrones just went up in like glorious, glorious fires. It was brilliant. But that's the thing. I feel like with Game of Thrones, it was over in a snap. It was like 3 weeks. Everyone was like mad as hell, and then it just went away, right? With The Walking Dead, though, year over year, people just disliked it more and more and more. And by season 11, it's like this is a meme on Reddit. You go on any like Ask Reddit, right? There's the subreddit. Whenever people ask anything about shows that have sort of become bad or shows that people dropped off or anything like that, one of the top voted ones, always The Walking Dead. Always, without an exception, always there. So I do agree with this. Unfortunately, I do think so. Maybe not the most spectacular failure, but a depressing one.
It's important to take a look back at the earlier years of The Walking Dead on television. The Walking Dead premiered on Halloween night of 2010.
You want to have an even greater look back at The Walking Dead early years? There's this thing made by Koroto.
And for the uninitiated, the show tells the story of Rick Grimes,
I'm Andrew Lincoln, aka Ricky Dicky Doodah Grimes.
a sheriff's deputy from Georgia.
I love that video so much.
On duty and wakes up from a coma about a month later. But when he wakes up, he finds out that the world has been destroyed and society has collapsed to a brutal zombie apocalypse. Completely disoriented, terrified, and very much still impaired by the fact that he got bodied by a shotgun, Rick ventures out of the hospital and attempts to navigate the city to try and find his wife Lori and his son Carl. And so the series essentially follows Rick and a group of survivors as they try to stay alive in the apocalypse, facing off against the undead, or worse, other groups of survivors. The show goes through many different incarnations.
So I guess he hasn't read the book because he hasn't mentioned it once yet. So I guess we're going with that assumption.
A total of 16 episodes split into 2 storylines of 8 episodes each, and the writers tried to softly reinvent the show in every half. And that capacity to constantly redefine itself was one of The Walking Dead's biggest strengths, but it ultimately also became one of its biggest problems. See, the one thing I find interesting
Became formulaic
about the fall of The
was the
Walking
problem.
Dead is that fans have different notions of when the show was officially dead. That's probably because it has a number of low points narratively, but also because it often managed to pick itself up in some capacity. And despite its unimaginably massive downfall, the show did keep somewhat of a cult following until the very end, with most people keeping a very strong attachment to the early days of the
I wonder for how many people, including me, is just the sunk cost fallacy. I mean, I've been here that long. I've been there for what, 13 years? Of course I'm gonna watch it until the end. Of course I will. Same as I will watch Fear the Walking Dead, even though I hate it. Like Fear the Walking Dead, I think it starts in a couple of weeks, right? I'm gonna watch it. I don't want to watch it. I really don't care about it, like, at all. But yeah, I'll watch it. You know, it's kind of, it's weird with these sorts of entertainment things. How some people, including me, I count myself among those, will just keep watching it, even though you don't really enjoy it anymore. Weird.
series. Season 1 is largely regarded as a fantastic season of television.
It is.
And I think it holds up pretty well.
Is there
It has
anyone
been
who thinks
seeing
season 1 is not
strong
incredible?
pilots, great characters, great pacing, mostly because season 1 is the shortest season of the show with only 6 episodes. It
Yes.
does an amazing job at setting up the rules of the world and introducing the characters and their different dynamics. Aside from Rick, his wife Lori, and his son Carl, we meet a larger cast that becomes integral parts of the show. Glenn, Carol, Shane, Morgan, and of course, the ultimate fan favorite, Daryl Dixon. The season is short, but
Again, like, I'm pretty sure he hasn't read the comics, so I wonder, like, he says the ultimate fan favorite Daryl. Does he know that Daryl literally wasn't meant to exist? The fact that Daryl was just spun out of Norman Reedus.
solid writing and great
That's,
directing,
I
which
find that so
makes it
amusing even
and
today.
extremely memorable. Season 2, however, is a bit more of a mixed bag for people. While many appreciate its character work and its very skilled displays of tension, the season also faced a lot of criticism for its slow pace and lack of action. And really, it's understandable after the fast-moving Season 1. Most of Season 2 takes place on a farm and deals with the characters trying to find the little girl that went missing. It's a very different dynamic than what Season 1 gave us, and a lot of people describe Season 2 as mainly being boring and uneventful. It's also often pointed out that Season 2 might have had a dip in quality due to the departure of the original showrunner at the end of Season 1.
All right, so with season two, there's a very simple explanation for that. First of all, yes, Darabont left, and they rewrote entire sections of season 2. But the thing there, and I don't remember if I mentioned this in the retrospective, I think I did, they slashed the budget while increasing the number of episodes, right? So this is where AMC was already like, oh, this Walking Dead thing seems to be successful. How about we get our money out of it, you know? Season 2 is a very, very good example of that.
Personally falls somewhere in the middle, but I think it can mostly be
Season 2 should have probably been like 8 episodes, 9 episodes. Something like that. Definitely not 13. Even though I love Season 2. It's just like, it shouldn't be that long.
Needing to get used to the show's tradition of reinventing itself in every new arc. But for me, this season is flawed, but still pretty solid.
Yes.
The tension of the show comes from the characters' interpersonal relationships.
The Shane arc was incredible.
Conflicts hold a lot of weight, especially when it comes to Rick and Shane. Shane's slow descent into madness in Season 2 is still one of my favorite storylines on the show, and the overall character development of the entire cast.
Shane's arc is so much better in the show. So much better.
Amazing. Long story short, Season 2 has some low points, but when it works, it really works. Season 3 is considered by a...
And I think that's why people still remember Season 2 fondly. Even though it is a slow burn, when you get to those emotional peaks, especially in the second half, like we have... oh my god, I forgot the episode title. The Sophia episode, right? Episode 7. When we have that, and then it goes right into the bar scene, right into the finale, the second half is perfect. The first half, I think people forget it just because the ending was so good. So that's sort of the lead up was worth it, right? Whereas with later seasons, some people would say that it's not really the case, especially with Negan, where we didn't have a payoff in the finale.
Number of fans
Think about that.
Simply be the best season of The Walking Dead, and it's not difficult to see why.
Season 3 is my favorite.
Season 1 and 2 were very different, and when it came to their individual qualities, Season 3 was the best of both worlds. While it managed to improve on its already amazing character work, this season also allowed itself to move a bit more. It's action-packed, fast-paced, the stakes are much higher.
It's too fast-paced, to be honest.
That, for the most part, are awesome, and of course, this is the season that also introduces the show's first real villain, the Governor. He was an insanely menacing psychopath with an eye patch, and people loved him. Season 3 also got praise for...
To be fair, he didn't have an eye patch originally, like, to be fair, right? That, just say.
Explore the psychological aspects of its characters. It's the point where the story shows how this zombie apocalypse is affecting the characters' mental health, and the writers handle it in a way that was incredibly intriguing and, at times, emotional. It's probably not the most realistic depiction of mental health, but to this day, the telephone twist in Season 3 still gives me goosebumps. I'll always remember
really good.
the first time I saw it. For those who don't know, it's a storyline where Rick gets a phone call from people who are willing to help the group. He talks to them several times, trying to find...
I think it's Amy, Jim, Lori, and someone else. I think so. I think there are 4 people who call him. I don't remember who, but I know that a lot of people were confused and actually thought it was a phone call. Like a real one.
Waiting by the phone for them to call, until he realizes in a gut punch of a twist that these people do not exist, that the phone he's using
Such a good shot.
work, and that he hallucinated the entire thing. It's an insanely well executed bait and switch that not only crushes the hope of the audience and the characters, but also comes as a crushing revelation to the audience that they really just spent this whole season watching the hero of the show slowly losing his sanity. Long story short, Season 3 is the season that really conquered audiences and catapulted the show at the top of the pop culture pyramid. This is the...
Honestly, with Season 3, I feel like the first 2 episodes were basically the ones that set The Walking Dead on its path. I think the first 2 seasons laid like a very, very good foundation, and people were there. People were already there, like viewership figures were going up and up and up, But when season 3 started, and we saw, like, the first episode, literally, Herschel gets bit. Like, in the first episode, nothing had even started properly, dude gets bit, and his leg is chopped off. Like, my guy. And then you tune back in, and Rick goes on a rampage in episode 2. And then a couple episodes later, freaking Lori dies. Like, season 3 is monumental. I love season 3 so much.
Season when The Walking Dead really became the must-watch television show the internet could not get enough.
Definitely. Don't say season 4 is bad.
Okay,
Hol-
this is where things get a bit tricky, so bear with me. I think the first signs of trouble for The Walking Dead really started to show in season 4, more specifically in the second half of season 4. While the first half served as a final chapter to the very popular Governor arc, the rest of the season is the beginning of the Terminus arc. And
Okay. Honestly, I'm surprised by this, because I would assume that most people had a problem with the fact that the Governor was pushed to season 4. That was sort of the wide reaction that I saw, like, way back in the day. The fact that it wasn't resolved by season 3. But I know that some people also don't really like the second half, even though it does lead up to the Terminus, and Terminus is excellent. Alright, let's see what he has to say.
where the show experiences a massive shift in its storytelling that became one of the primary reasons for its eventual downfall. And that is because the Terminus arc marks the beginning of what I like to call The Walking Dead's boomerang storytelling. Let me explain what I mean by that. The second half of season 4 sees the aftermath of Rick and his group's final showdown against the Governor and his forces. Their sanctuary was destroyed as a result of the battle, and the entire group was separated in the process of escaping the chaos. So, the show now had to follow micro groups of characters scattered around different parts of the map, trying to find their friends and family members and attempting to survive in the wild. Now, in theory, that's totally fine. You can easily make that work by separating your episodes in 2 or 3 plot lines. We can jump from plot A to plot B.
He's going to talk about bottle
plot
episodes, I
C,
think.
and everything would be okay. That's what most TV shows do. But instead of doing that, producer Scott Gimple, who was also the showrunner at the time, opted to do things differently. This is where he started experimenting with boomerang storytelling, aka the idea of dedicating an entire episode to a
Bottle
single
episodes.
character
Yep.
or a single group of characters.
Okay, so the problem wasn't bottle episodes, in my opinion. I do think that bottle episodes were generally a problem, especially because AMC kept slashing their budget. Well, rather not slashing it, but just not increasing it enough, right? So we had bottle episodes which were literally set place in, like, a small patch of the forest, in a small building, and it's like, come on, you seriously expect me to have fun watching something for 40 minutes where nothing changes? I mean, yeah, character dialogue, cool, but give me something else, right? That is why you should have parallel storylines, one which is introspective, and one which is more so about sort of the world and everything, right? But I don't think the bottle episodes were the main problem. What I think was the main problem is that, and I talk about this a lot, is the fact that they took the storylines from the comic book and they expanded on them, and then when we already had expanded storylines, they tried expanding them even further while still sticking to the comic timeline, and it sort of created this massively bloated story which seemed sort of linear but never was, right? And that's when these bottle episodes, when they slowed down the core narrative, I think that's what really, really hurt. Not the fact that they were bottle episodes in and of themselves. I think it was just more so a case of expectations and where the bigger story is going, if that makes sense.
Basically, this narrative structure consists of one storyline being the focus of one episode, and having a sort of rotation through the season. To simplify, it means episode 1 would focus on storyline 1, episode 2 would focus on storyline 2, episode 3 on storyline 3.
And by the way, I don't know if he's going to talk about this, but apparently the reason for this is as simple as, if you have the actors in the episode, you need to pay them money, right? So it's not a case of sort of them trying to do this to I don't even know what other explanation it could be. Literally, if the character appears in the episode even for a second, apparently they're credited and they need to be paid, like, immediately, right? So they wouldn't even show them for, like, a single second. So it's again, just a case of budgeting.
Episode 4 on storyline 4, and then episode 5 would then circle back around and go back to storyline 1, and then that same cycle would continue until all the storylines converge.
That cut was so good.
So, Do I need to explain why that model sucks? This narrative structure was incredibly irritating because it made the continuity of the show become a drag. It undid the momentum of virtually every single storyline in the season, which is only made worse by the fact that it would feature plot threads people would be invested in, but then it would consistently be ruined. Because basically,
That's the thing. We had bottle episodes in season 3. We had episodes like Walk With Me was exclusively a Governor episode. No one complained. Why? Because it was good. Bottle episodes are not the problem. The problem is when they literally contribute nothing to the bigger narrative, or worse yet, you have 2 bottle episodes back to back, Beth, and then she dies. That's the problem.
Watch an episode about Rick, and it would follow him through a storyline that was thrilling and exciting and full of tension.
Exactly.
And on a strong cliffhanger, and people would be buzzing about it and talking about.
And then you
it
see him
online,
3 weeks later
and
again.
Be excited about the next episode, but then you tune in the following week, and the next episode is about another character elsewhere doing other things.
This is very good. Otherwise, it bombs and bombs and bombs even harder. Exactly. And that's the thing with these shows where, of course, they had like a hardcore audience that would always be there, right? But we're not talking about those. We're talking about the water cooler people who are talking about, oh, did you watch the last episode of The Walking Dead? We are only concerned with this group of people. Why? Because there are lots of them, right? And when they talk about The Walking Dead and they're like, oh my god, did you see the last episode? I can't wait to see what happens next. Then next week, they arrive at their water cooler, they're trying to share a coffee, and it's like, oh my god, this episode was kind of bad, right? And then next week they arrive and like, what happened to like Rick's story? Can we please go back to that? And then in another week, and it just compounds and compounds, and the word of mouth that was once there just disappears, right? That's the problem, again. But you know.
So you would wait for the week after.
It is what it is.
The episode would be about yet another secondary.
He's saying exactly what I'm
character in
saying.
Their own corner of the show doing other things, and so on and so on. So you would watch the very cool episode with Rick and his awesome cliffhanger, but then you would have to wait like a month to see where that goes. Because the show then gave you 3 weeks of filler storylines that could have easily been combined into one episode. You basically just had to wait for
They
the
should have
main
always been combined,
storyline
is how I
to
think.
back around like a boomerang.
I never watched Family Guy. I like, this is a hot take. I hate Family Guy. I don't like The Simpsons. I don't really like Rick and Morty. I don't like any of these. I don't think they're funny. I think they're dumb.
It's a terrible narrative choice that slowed the show down and created a really, really frustrating experience for viewers. People hoped it would be short-lived, but it wasn't.
It only got
The
worse.
storytelling model turned out to be a flaw that dragged the show down all the way through the end of season 8.
This is what I said before. The fact that they kept on adding new characters and expanding the storylines that were there in the book only compounded this problem to an infinite extent. We had these bottle episodes that usually lasted like 1 or 2 episodes, right? So in season 4, we had the Beth episode, for example. That was a single episode, and then we were back to the main group. By season 8 and season 9, we had so many characters, especially season 8, early season 8. When we left Rick for like 4 episodes, it was insane. It was insane.
But, to backtrack...
Just too many characters, too many storylines, and all of them should have been going at the same time.
Here in season 4, people still absolutely adored the show during that time. It's something that...
Season 4 is my
noticed,
second favorite
but
season, I
wasn't
think.
a problem.
Maybe season 5.
I mentioned it earlier, but season 5 is the point where The Walking Dead peaked as a show.
It
the
did.
ratings for season 5 were insane. It was the biggest TV show in the world, an absolute pop culture phenomenon like we'd never seen before. And again, every single episode was a massive event. The show seemed unstoppable.
No Sanctuary, man.
Then came season 6. Season 6 was a defining point for The Walking Dead, a definitive entry that saw a major and extremely important shift happen. Not only because of some narrative choices that didn't quite go right, but also because season 6 is the point where the fandom started to have some real issues with the show for the very first time. Issues they had a difficult time ignoring. It was the point where the audience was starting to voice their problems with the show very openly. Looking back now, I think
I've complained about the show ever since season 2 or 3.
season 6 can reasonably be reframed as the beginning of the end for The Walking Dead. Because
I don't think so. I think season 7 is the beginning of the end, but I mean that's semantics. But yeah, I love complaining about stuff I like. So
while seasons 4 and 5 made
Let's
some
see,
wonky
let's see.
decisions and experiments that didn't quite land with fans, season 6 was the definitive point where the show started to make fatal mistakes it would never recover from. For one, by that point, Scott Gimple seemed to be set on the idea of boomerang storytelling becoming the primary narrative structure for the show. He was using it constantly, and audiences were really starting to feel the effects of it. The show was becoming dull at points, it took forever to get to the point if it ever did, and the exciting and thrilling nature of the story became a rare occurrence.
I don't think season 6 was slow though. Season 6 was pretty good. Because I mean, we got the Wolves storyline, and that immediately went into No Way Out. And then I guess the first couple of, but no, even the second half of season 6, it's like the first episode is relatively peaceful, right? But I think we meet Jesus there as well. Oh no, the first episode after the mid-season finale is No Way Out, right? So yeah, they had broken that up. And then we meet Jesus, and then it's right into the Saviors. I don't think pacing was really a problem for season 6, to be honest.
Usually kept for premieres and finales, as the rest
18916.
season felt
I hate
like
it.
was purposefully wasting your time.
Yes.
Over the course of season 6, from the first few episodes, there was a certain frustration that started to grow among the fandom. At first, it was kinda tame because it seemed to be the only major problem people had with the show, but that quickly changed for the worst. To make it short, Scott Gimple and the writers were starting to rely on cheap tricks to mess with the audience and
It's gonna be
to carry
Glenn.
the plot of the show. These cheap tricks came in different forms that seemed to annoy different fans, but it was only a matter of time before they pulled the one cheap trick that would make everybody
It's gonna be Glenn and
angry
Negan.
and turn that frustration into real backlash against the show.
603,
The rate they were
616.
going, it was only a matter of time before the show made its first fatal mistake. And that fatal mistake
The dumpster.
inevitably
Glenn.
arrived in episode 7 of season 6, where the writers pulled a card that forever changed the audience's
Oh,
perception.
Glenn reappears in episode
That
7.
now infamous fatal mistake was the Glenn fake-out death.
Yeah, I said
Now,
episode
I'd
3
like to
because
point out
that's where he
to anyone
falls.
watching this who hasn't seen The Walking Dead, that in its early years, one of the biggest elements that made the show so incredibly thrilling is the fact that
No
they
one was safe.
established very early on that this was a story where nobody was safe. The Walking Dead was a show where anybody could.
And this is so bad for future seasons. This gets so bad around like season 8. Around season 8, you can literally pick out the main characters, and you can know for an absolute fact that none of them will ever face any consequences for anything they do. Characters like Daryl, Carol, Michonne, like obviously. Oh, when Judith entered the picture, she has like plot armor 90,000. Like nothing could ever happen to Judith. There are a bunch of characters, and that was the antithesis of what The Walking Dead was. And then when they started announcing the spin-offs, it only got so much worse. So I 100% believe, agree with
They knew
this.
that if they wanted the stakes of the show to feel real, the audience needed to feel and see that constant danger. That could only be achieved effectively by killing off main characters in the most brutal and shocking ways. And they succeeded at that. They actually pulled that off really well. It was a big thing. Every time something would go down in the show, the audience would be tense. You would be on the edge of your seat, holding your breath and clenching your butt cheeks,
Shane and
because
Laurie
any
dying like
action
back to
sequence
back.
meant you were
That's what
probably
cemented
about to
that.
watch your favorite character get eaten by zombies or get their head chopped off. It was really stressful. And they didn't even keep the big character deaths for big moments like a season finale or something like that. No, sometimes a major character would just die in the middle of a random episode in a gruesome and
Laurie is the
brutal
biggest
manner,
one, yeah.
and the show had to move on immediately because urgency. We have to move. We have have to survive, and that was an element of the story that truly contributed to its high stakes. However, over time, this aspect of the show became less of a necessary narrative device, and instead it slowly turned into a weird and cheap gimmick primarily used for shock value. Character deaths started to feel like they didn't really have a point anymore, and most of the main cast started to develop some pretty thick plot armor, meaning most of the brutal death scenes were given to side characters people didn't really care about. It all became white noise, and 5 or 6 seasons in, the show's extreme gore had lost its impact. People were used to it now, so the gimmick was reduced to shock value that wasn't shocking. So, to try and muster up some emotion out of the fans, Scott Gimple and the writers made a very bad decision. A bad decision that was a huge mix of bad writing, cheap shock value, and a lethal dose of boomerang storytelling. Let me walk you through it. In episode 3 of season 6, there is a scene featuring fan favorite Glenn Rhee facing off against a herd of zombies with another character.
And this is why this literally broke everyone's minds, is because it was Glenn. Like, compared to the book, and I've said this before, Glenn in the TV show is so much more likable. He is so much more important. Everything about Glenn is perfect. I mean, even Kirkman himself said that Glenn, Stephen Ewan, was incredible, right? And that he sort of would like to change the comic version of Glenn to fit Stephen Ewan, even though, you know, he kind of took the bat. But when after this happened, I mean, I hate using the term, but like insulting your audience's intelligence, this was that. This was exactly that. This was like, hey, look at this, feel sad. And then a couple episodes later, it was like, no, you shall not feel sad. He has returned. Now applaud me. It's like, you don't want to do that.
They have to retreat into an alleyway where they get completely surrounded and have for only protection their ability to climb on top of a dumpster, where they find themselves completely stuck. At this point, Nicholas, the other character with Glenn, is completely overwhelmed by the situation, and it seems like there is no immediate solution for them to be saved. So Nicholas completely panics and almost seems to dissociate for a short but tense moment, after which he turns around to face Glenn and thanks him. He then grabs his gun and shoots himself in the head. In his fall to the ground, he accidentally takes Glenn down with him, and they both fall from the dumpster. The scene is then overtaken by sad music as we watch Glenn being brutally...
This is like, feel sad, feel sad, feel sad.
Immediately after that scene aired, the audience erupted on social media. It was an absolute whirlwind, but not in the way you'd expect. Where Scott Gimple and the people behind the show expected the scene to be met with the same sense of shock and horror as previous big character deaths, this time they were instead met with a surprising amount of frustration. It turns out that most of the audience could immediately tell that something about Glenn's death scene was...
I remember.
It didn't take long for everyone to believe
I remember.
he didn't actually die.
This has got to be a fake out.
Nah, that's not Glenn. That can't be Glenn.
It was fake in the comics.
That's not him. That's Nicholas.
It's Nicholas on top of him. It's not Glenn.
They're eating Nicholas. They've got to be eating Nicholas, right?
And that really made people mad, because resorting to fake out
And
deaths
and
like
that's the
this-
thing. If they had actually gone through with it and just been like, no, that's it. That's what happened. It would have been so good. It would have reestablished the sense of danger immediately. Episode 3, Glenn wanders off. We even have this emotional bit of seemingly them trying to get out, but no, it gets cut short, and that's it. We deal with it, we move on. That's how the comic always handled these sorts of things. That's what should have happened, probably. Even though, I've talked about it before, but I think they should have maybe thought about somehow keeping Glenn on, because clearly a lot of people like Glenn. I didn't really care. I liked Glenn, but I never dropped the show because of Glenn. Apparently a lot of people did.
Was
So
solidifying for a lot of fans fans that the show was losing steam, and they were angry at the writers for doing something so manipulative and lame in such a big way, which is something they never really had to do before. But despite the frustration, at the time there was no confirmation of anything yet, so people decided to give the show the benefit of the doubt, and everybody agreed to wait for episode 4 to come out the following week to see what happens.
And nothing happened.
The problem is, remember, the show was now operating with boomerang storytelling, and that really didn't help anything. The following week, episode 4 came out, and no mention of Glenn. People were really annoyed by that. Episode 5 came out the week after that.
No Glenn.
Still no Glenn. Now people were getting really pissed off. But another week after that,
No Glenn.
episode 6 came out, and still no mention of Glenn. I wish I was kidding, but I'm not. It's not until episode 7, a full month later, that the show finally circled back around to Glenn, and we got to find out his fate. One episode before the mid-season finale. And so, after all of this, I will let you imagine the uproar that came from the audience when they found out that all those theories about the fake death scene were right. Glenn didn't die, he was not ripped apart by the walkers, that was the body of Nicholas on top of him. Glenn actually survived by sliding under the dumpster and waiting for 24 hours for the zombies to
This was
just
dumb.
leave.
This was
And
dumb.
then he got up and just
Walkers don't even work like that. They literally go after Rick in season 1, episode 1.
This was a very specific turning point for the show, one that fundamentally broke the trust between the audience and the writers, and that was the first fatal mistake the show made. People felt betrayed, they felt like their time was being wasted. The boomerang storytelling was now an unavoidable problem everyone was way too aware of, and the writers beginning to rely on outlandish fake-outs for manufactured drama made people instantly worried about the future of the show. Especially because, spoiler alert, Glenn would end up dying for real just 9 episodes later.
So-
but we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
After that whole
We'll get to
debacle,
it
the show
as well.
moved on, and the rest of season 6 served as a big piece of narrative build-up for the highly anticipated arrival of The Walking Dead's most notorious big bad, Negan. Negan is introduced in the season 6 finale, as he shows up in one of my favorite scenes.
Oh, this is gonna be good. If you're watching this on YouTube, can you see anything on the screen right now? Because I'm guessing I'm watching a compressed version, right? Because I'm watching it on YouTube. And then you're gonna be watching my compressed version of the compressed version. Is gonna be a black screen.
He spent the entire
It's gonna be
second half of the
incredible.
season in the shadows, tricking Rick and his group into being at his mercy as revenge after they killed some of his people, and he completely overpowers them. After the audience heard his name in almost every episode of the season, he finally reveals himself in the last third of the finale. His introduction scene is incredibly tense, and he addresses the group for the first time in an 11-minute monologue that is performed brilliantly by Jeffrey Dean Morgan.
You're Rick, right? I'm Negan. And I do not appreciate you killing my men.
And when I send my people to kill your
Also, when
people,
I sent my people to kill your people for
I
killing
know
my
this
people,
entire thing by heart.
You killed more of my people.
Not cool.
Not cool. I don't want to kill you people. Just want to make that clear from the get-go. I want you to work for me. You can't do
I literally know this entire thing by heart. I just know the uncensored version because I think that's a lot funnier.
if you're dead now, can you? All right, listen. Don't any of you do that again. I will shut that shit down.
No exceptions. No exceptions.
First one's free. It's an emotional moment. I get it.
I think they should have killed Daryl here, I'm gonna be honest. Well, let's not open that can of
Honestly,
worms.
This scene is so good. Sometimes I just go on YouTube to watch it randomly.
Uncensored.
It's a masterclass of tension. It's incredibly well acted. But while Negan's arrival is hands down one of my favorite scenes in the entire show, it is also the scene that made millions of people
Leave.
rage quit on The Walking Dead. Because the ending of the season turned out to be the show's second fatal mistake. Now, whether you've seen the show or not, you've probably heard about the absolute
Is he going to talk about just the cliffhanger, or is he going to talk about the fact that Glenn dies? Because I feel like both are important issues. And not only that, I also think it overshadowed Abe's death.
Created by what is essentially considered to be the worst cliffhanger
Yes.
in television history. It made people so mad that it literally broke the internet.
It did.
Was completely insane. Seriously, the backlash got so bad that like Scott Gimple had to address it to the press. Actors tried to defend the decision in interviews. People were screaming for Scott Gimple to be fired.
And I've said this before, there's such an easy fix for this. Such an easy fix. They wouldn't even need to film anything else. What they should have done is they should have given us the first death, they should have revealed it, and then they should have left it on the whole, like, first one's free, second one, no exceptions, cut to black, that's it. Perfect. Perfect. We saw one, it's like, oh my god, this is Negan, the dude just did this, like, what the hell? And then we cut to black, and we know that there's going to be another one. We don't know that there's going to be another one, but it definitely seems like there's going to be another one. Perfect. Perfect.
They denounced the show's manipulative antics. It was a fucking shit show. So, what?
That's the
was
best way
the
to describe it.
Well, after Negan finishes his incredible monologue, he lets Rick and the gang know that he will punish their arrogance by brutally murdering one person in the group with his baseball bat. He wants to make everybody watch as he bashes someone's head in as violently.
I'm just getting started.
Now, it's a very famous scene
Oh,
from the comics
so he has
it
read
was
it.
adapted from, and people were really looking forward to seeing it adapted, because there were a lot of questions about whether the show was going to pick the same victim as the comics, or instead opt for killing off another character to keep the surprise. As the finale approached, the people behind the show promised a major death. They told people they would be shocked when they see who dies, so everybody tuned in. Scott Gimple was hyping the ending so much, everyone was
To be fair, I do think that hyping it up and saying that somebody big will die, I mean, of course they did. First of all, because not everyone has read the comic. I think like a good 90% of the Walking Dead viewers base haven't read the comic, right? I think that is a very fair assumption. So I don't think really hyping it up is a big deal. The problem is hyping it up and there being no death in the finale. That's the problem.
Completely intrigued by the arrival of this Negan guy. The excitement was at a peak, and then Negan shows up. He announces he's gonna kill someone.
And then
lifts
doesn't
his
kill anyone.
bat and smashes it down. You hear people screaming, and then it cuts to black. Yeah. That's not a joke. After all this build-up, after all the promise and the hype, the Season 6 finale ends without actually showing you who Negan kills. He hits the camera, and then it cuts to black. It's a cheap and infuriating cliffhanger that made people...
I remember watching this guy. I don't know his name, but I remember watching him. I remember seeing this, like, this reaction of his. Dude's like...
fucking furious, and understandably so, because people now had to wait almost 7 months just to see who died. The backlash the show got was so loud, it was honestly impressive. It proved to be a breaking point for many viewers though, and this is the first big moment that became a last straw for a huge part of the fandom that quit the show right then and there. And then...
To be fair, and again, I am sort of... How do I put this? I think with these sorts of things, people do tend to get very angry, and I was also very angry. But the thing is, I hold this belief that every single controversy, especially like with something like media, right, where no one really cares, people are mad, right, but it's not really like a huge deal. Honestly, I think if The Walking Dead picked it right up from there and was just good all the way through, everybody would have forgotten the cliffhanger and no one would have cared. You know why? Because it would have never mattered again. Every single time someone started watching the show, it would not have mattered at all. It only mattered for those 7 months, and that's it. So if you were watching the show at the time, yes, you might have been mad, but if Season 7 picked it up and was incredible, everyone would have forgotten about it. Yeah, we could probably remember it and say that, yeah, they probably shouldn't have done that, but no one would care. Problem was, Season 7...
came Season 7. The first episode of Season 7...
It's very, very easy to... like, think about... This is probably not a good example. With games too, right? I always say that every single bad like game that's about to die is a cinematic away from being great again. Unfortunately, the hype machine works very well with these sorts of things, and obviously The Walking Dead falls into that bucket as well.
Is considered by many to be one of the best episodes of the show.
It is.
If not the best episode.
It is,
which,
100%.
Obviously, after all the backlash of the Season 6 finale during its entire hiatus, they knew this premiere had to be a fucking banger. And as promised, we do end up finding out in this premiere who Negan killed. It was Abraham and Glenn, by the way. The episode is thrilling, brutal, emotional. It makes Negan even more terrifying than he was in the Season 6 finale. And honestly, aside from some criticism over how graphic this episode was,
it's silly.
Season 7
We don't care
premiere
about.
was
We don't
so
care about
good
that.
and got so many people talking about it. Some people were convinced the show would succeed at getting the fans' trust back. And these
Exactly.
people were wrong.
Yes.
I'm gonna make this short. Season 7 and 8 ruined the show. Plain and simple. After the first episode of Season 7, the show just crashes in terms of quality. It's an absolute freefall that to this day I do not understand. It's almost hard to believe the nosedive the show goes on during this time. I still have trouble believing it's real, even though I watched all of it. Basically, to give you a brief overview, Season 7 and 8 are just 31 episodes of boomerang storytelling where nothing happens. It is all about the war against Negan, which should have been the most bonkers storyline in the entire show, especially after that crazy setup, but it is just so dull. It's an endless back and forth of useless bullshit and filler episodes that go on and
Remember the scene I always used in the Season 8 videos where they're just shooting at each other for like 30 seconds straight? Nothing happens. Just dudes shooting back and forth a lot. Just keeps going. Just keep shooting. Just keep shooting. Shoot at the windows. Shoot at the car. Shoot at the dudes. Nothing happens. Just keep shooting.
and on
Keep
and
shooting.
on, and the show just never gets to the point. It seemed like the writer's plan with the story just became, how do we waste as much time as possible to keep dragging this on so we can milk more seasons out of the show. It's uninteresting, it's boring as fuck, it feels tired as hell, and in the process of ruining the story, they also ruin all of the characters one by one. Negan is given one of the most badass introductions in the history of television, but despite Jeffrey Dean Morgan never giving a bad performance in this role, the character ends up becoming an annoying villain that feels boring and mishandled because he just never gets to the point.
I'm Negan. And I fed him spaghetti.
Rick is completely directionless as a character now. Daryl, who is by far the most popular character on the show, becomes a background character that hardly ever speaks. He literally spends 2 seasons just grunting at people and barely says anything. And that's not just me saying it, by the way. Norman Reedus himself acknowledged it afterwards.
And for the last couple seasons, Daryl has been speaking in a series of grunts and snarls. And in this episode,
I'm not. You're right.
Basically, over the last few seasons, the show had just become a repetitive drag that kept itself going by taking a couple of major storylines and recycling them over and over and over again. And season 7 and 8 were the worst of it.
Yes.
It was
And the thing is,
just-
like, normally, such an absolute statement, right, that season 7 and 8 killed the show, it wouldn't really be true, but in the case of The Walking Dead, like, it kind of literally did, right? It sort of set the path for everything to follow. And then, I mean, right on the heels of that, we have, like, a list of characters that just left. So,
these 2 seasons are
again, it's a case of redeeming the show versus just dooming it further. And unfortunately, season 7 and 8 I do think were basically like the kill shots.
Shameful. They're so bad, it's almost insulting. And enough was enough for the audience, because season 7 is the point where The Walking Dead started losing viewers for the first time. And it was noticeable
And fast.
because they were losing viewers fast. The ratings were dropping at an alarming rate, and that continued through season 8.
Hey, that rhymes.
Fan communities online just dwindled away. Some of them got really angry and started to just rant about the show every week until they just stopped covering it. It was just really sad. The show that at one
It
point
was.
easily got between
It was very
13
sad.
and
I can attest to
17
that.
million live viewers.
Though, to be fair, we don't really know the true numbers, and this is something I say a lot. With, like, US ratings, they do, like, depict a trend, but we have to keep in mind that this is around the time where streaming was getting super big, right? So, yeah, we can look at the trend in viewers, and that definitely does depict it. And, I mean, I can attest to it, right? Like, purely based off of Reddit activity and everything else. Interest was definitely going down, but, like, the numbers themselves are not wholly representative, especially because they are just US numbers.
Whereas every single week, which was just gigantic, by the way, was now dropping below the 10 million line regularly, and that drop showed
In the
no sign
US.
of stopping. And it never did stop, by the way. The show never recovered from season 7 and 8, especially not after they made their third and final fatal mistake. Because in the mid-season finale of
Carl.
season 8, the writers randomly decided to kill off Carl Grimes.
Well, you see, it was not random at all. It was a very, very highbrow move to give Rick the motivation of stopping the war, you see. And that's when he left the show, by the way.
Rick's son.
Oh, no.
There was a whole lot of drama around it behind the scenes because allegedly Chandler Riggs, who played Carl, was told that he was going to stay on the show for a really long time, and he was planning a lot of stuff in his life to go according to that, and then they just...
I don't know where this comes from. So many people say that he wanted to go to college or like whatever. No, he bought a house near where they shoot the show because he thought he would be shooting the show for years to come. He didn't want to leave the show. His dad wrote a very, very angry email. It's in the retrospective, if you're curious. It's in one of the retrospectives I talk about. His parents were very salty with Scott Gimple because he was basically fired for no reason, with like very little warning.
killed him off randomly very fast after he renewed his contract. But before people even found out about that, there was already just outrage everywhere.
I wonder why.
After 23 episodes of complete boredom and mediocrity, Carl's death comes out of nowhere and in a way that feels incredibly unearned. And it was just the ultimate breaking point for the show. Carl's death proved to be the last straw for a lot of people. Everyone was so done with The Walking Dead's bullshit. Scott Gimple's name became synonymous with the show's downfall. Everybody accepted that
Wait, again, to be fair, the only reason why a downfall for The Walking Dead exists is because it had a uprising to begin with, and Scott Gimple was responsible for that. The Walking Dead grew very fast throughout seasons 4 and 5, and that was Scott Gimple. Just to be fair.
show's glory days were long gone, and so fans quit on the show by the millions.
Honestly, I think it was just complacency. As like the show went on more and more, I think they just like they didn't like feel like that they have competition and everything like that.
Literally got
think that's
to
the
the
problem.
point where the cast of the show was sent on a whole press tour early in season 9 to literally beg people not to give up on the show. Season 9 also saw Scott Gimple stepping down as showrunner to handle larger projects within the franchise, and longtime writer of the series, Angela Kang, coming in to
represent.
take over as the new boss. After the complete disasters that were the last 2 seasons, AMC and literally everyone involved in the show knew there needed to be a change, and Angela was determined to bring the show back to its former glory. And you know what? Against all odds, she succeeded. Angela Kang actually fixed the show. Season 9
To
is
an
one
extent.
of the best seasons of The Walking Dead. It is one of the best return to forms I've ever seen on television. And
They are.
Angela takes
Considering what she had to work with, and again, I've said this in the retrospective, it definitely is, but it still has a lot of problems with it.
100% of the credit for that. And she had to work with a lot of bullshit
Exactly.
to manage to make it this good. She had to deal with the aftermath of the worst 2 seasons, and she also had to deal with Andrew Lincoln leaving the show. We'll talk about his departure more in a little bit, but him leaving meant Angela was now tasked with reinventing the show without its protagonist. It should have been a losing battle from the get-go, but she somehow managed to do it. She made The Walking Dead great again. But it didn't matter. The show actually got better, yes, but it was too little too late. Despite remaining fans and critics being back on the show's side and praising it again, Walking Dead spent the entirety of Season 9 bleeding viewers left and right. Despite the grand return to form, they just couldn't make the show recover from the major mistakes of the last 3 seasons. Every single week saw new ratings low for
And I still think Season 9 is too long, just FYI. This is another thing I'll talk about in the upcoming retrospective, by the way.
Finale, and it continued in the seasons that followed. People just left the show in droves. And for the record, I was one of those people too. Despite the fact that I loved Season 9 and was super impressed by how Angela Kang reinvented the show, I somehow couldn't find the motivation to watch Season 10.
Because no
I
Rick.
did start the season when it came out, but 2 episodes in, literally on the second week, something in my brain just went, I'm tired of this. And I just never...
Could it be because the saviors were still there? I think so. This is literally what I said in the retrospective, by the way. Again, I keep referencing it, but I've talked about a lot of these things to death already. He said second episode. That's still saviors. And if you're returning to the show after 2 years of saviors, and then you start Season 9, a new beginning, and saviors are still a thorn in your side, I don't blame him.
Never went back to the show. I officially gave up on The Walking Dead 2 episodes into Season 10. And I think
Oh, no, Season 10, never mind.
because, yes,
Never mind.
like I said, it was too little too late, but it's also because the sense of community around the show was completely
gone
by that point.
And they made it worse by separating releases. This was, I think Season 10 was when they started doing the AMC Plus stuff. So people saw it a week early, or I think it was with Season 10, a few days early maybe. Whatever the case, it was horrible.
It was true for the fandom as a whole, and it was also true for me individually. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned how my people and I used to watch the show.
My people and I.
Groups, and we had a watch party every week with friends and family members around some good food. And then whoever wasn't able to make it would call after the episode, and we would all talk about it and stuff. And it was a hype that felt amazing and fun, fresh. But by the time Season 10 rolled around, I was the only person in my entire extended circle that was still watching the show.
This is exactly the same case for me. By Season 9 and 10, I was the only one watching the show, and no one else I talked to watched the show. And this should not be understated, because it is so important. Community engagement is the #1 thing that drives these shows. That's the reason why Game of Thrones was so incredibly big, because people constantly talked about Game of Thrones. And again, this is why I keep mentioning the AMC Plus stuff, because they literally, by design, split the amount of people talking about the show. It is a horrible decision by every single metric. They literally earned a bit more money in the short run by basically cutting their audience in half. Probably not even in half. Whatever the case, it was a very bad call, in my opinion. I don't think it should have happened. And I think this is a very good representation of that.
And that's not hyperbole, by the way. When I tell you I was the only one, I mean that. I did not
Same.
know a single person who was still watching the show.
Same.
All of my friends had stopped watching, my friends' friends stopped watching, my girlfriend had grown to hate the show, my brother quit when Carl died in season 8, and that was his favorite show of all time, so you can imagine. There wasn't a single soul left in my life that was still watching the show. And watching by myself just did not hit the same. And so the mix of all these elements made me get bored of the show in a way that made it unwatchable for me. And I don't think I was the only one in that boat, because The Walking Dead's rapid decline never really slowed down. Remember when I said that at its peak, The Walking Dead could pull up to 17 million live viewers? Yeah, well, by season
I think it was like
11,
2.
the show was only pulling about 1 million
Oh, yeah.
viewers per episode.
Well, again, to be fair, these are ratings, so these are not all the people on AMC Plus, all the people in EU and everything like that. They are representative. Don't get me wrong, but 1 million is not. It's not like a actual number.
I don't know if you realize how insane that is. That's not a small little drop that you can ignore. By season 11, the show had lost about 94% of its viewership. How much? 94%. That is just brutal. There's no way you can look at that and go, oh, that's fine. No, that's catastrophic. When I told you the show had a historical downfall, I wasn't exaggerating. The series finale, the end of this 12-year journey that meant so much
It was too long.
so many people, only pulled about 2 million viewers. And to this day, almost 6 months after the finale, some old fans of the show are not even aware that The Walking Dead ended last year. And oh, speaking of the devil,
Spin-offs. It's not over.
let's talk about the very reason I made this video.
The Rick
Let's
Mach-
talk about the ending. I hate the ending of The Walking Dead.
Pretty much same.
I can't stand it. Watching it made me so frustrated.
This scene here, like, again, I've talked about it before. I'm excited for the Rick and Michonne spin-off, right? I'm gonna give it a shot. We'll see what happens. Again, sunk cost fallacy and all that. But this was another one of those scenes where it was like you watch the finale and it ends on this sort of hollow note. Because again, like most characters just go off on their spin-offs. Literally, most of the core characters we were following in the final season were all set up for their spin-offs. So none of the stories were resolved by design, right? And then this one is like, please keep watching. This scene here. I don't know. It's weird. It's weird. And also, another thing that is, when he mentions like 12 years long journey, another thing I feel like hurts The Walking Dead in terms of rewatchability, and I don't know, this may be just a me thing, but I don't think Walking Dead has a lot of rewatchability nowadays. And it's not because it's not a rewatchable show, I think it very much is. I think the problem with it is that it's too long. I think rewatching a show that is almost 200 episodes is insane. So, you know, I don't know.
And so sad at the same time. Now, to reiterate, yes, I did stop watching the show 2 episodes into season 10, and I never finished that season, and I never watched the first half of season 11. Although, from what I've seen online, the general consensus is that season 10 starts really strong and gets really dull, especially with a handful of episodes that were shot during COVID and that were not initially planned. So,
What do you mean? Did you not enjoy the episode around Carol making soup? For 45 minutes. There's a rat. There is.
That what you will. I eventually returned to the show
To be fair,
watch the
Here's
last
Negan is
4
incredible.
episodes, and the finale left me incredibly irritated. But why? Why is the ending of The Walking Dead so frustrating?
Because it's not an
Why
ending.
is it so bad? After all, it's not an ending that is as outwardly insulting and soul-shattering as other shows. It's not the finale of Game of Thrones, or Lost, Pretty Little Liars, How I Met Your Mother, Dexter, or hell, even The Sopranos. But while it's easy...
Hold up. Hold up. Hold up. Wait a minute. Hold up. Hold up. Hold up. Hold up. Hold up. Okay. Okay. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. hold on. You don't drop a line like that and not elaborate. Where is it? Game of Thrones, I agree. Lost, I agree. I've been meaning to make content on Lost, but frankly, I would have to rewatch it, and I don't want to rewatch it. Lost is... the story was lost, is the problem with Lost. I haven't seen Pretty Little Liars, I don't know what that is. I haven't watched How I Met Your Mother either. Dexter I haven't seen either. Sopranos, the Sopranos ending was incredible. I don't care what anyone says, it was perfect. Perfect. Down to the last minute detail, it was perfect. Perfect. Very hot take.
While it's easy to understand
I love The
why
Sopranos.
finales of these shows created such a massive shitstorm in pop culture, I think the ending of The Walking Dead is a failure for a reason that is very different from all the other ones. At least to me. Because sure, the finale itself as an episode is not as bad as all the other ones I just mentioned. If anything, it's just very underwhelming. But I somehow found it to be way more frustrating.
I think the reason why it's so frustrating is because it doesn't make you angry, it doesn't make you happy, it doesn't make you really feel anything, it's kind of bland.
And the reason for that is very simple. The ending of The Walking Dead is not a real ending.
Exactly.
The show ends, yes, but the story doesn't. The Walking Dead finale is not a true swan song. It's a jumping pad used to expand on the franchise in AMC's continual
and I hate this.
desperate attempts at creating their Walking Dead universe. The characters that we loved and cherished don't actually complete arcs that come full circle or allows them to find closure. No, they're just being sent off to different spin-off series in different parts of the world. Daryl Dixon, who essentially became the protagonist after Rick's departure, will somehow find himself in Paris in a new show of his own.
Saw a picture of this. I'm not going to talk about it because it's a leak, but it's very funny. And the worst thing about this whole thing is that I feel like it just taints the like, how do I put this? I feel like the very name of The Walking Dead nowadays in pop media has been tainted. It's lost its reputation, if that makes sense. I feel like the branding of The Walking Dead is now synonymous with cheap series, with endless spin-offs. At least from my point of view. It feels like every single Reddit comment I read about the show, again in these Ask Reddit threads, is negative. And it's not a case of even them having seen the series, it's just basically from what they've heard. And that makes me very sad, because I would love for them to reinvent the wheel, very literally, and start a new series with the Walking Dead title, but just something else. Problem is, they're probably not going to do that, because that involves taking risks, and we do not like risks. We like making a 20% margin on a series with Daryl Dixon, which we're probably going to shoot on an extremely tight budget, and it's going to be great.
That is currently
I hate it.
Maggie and Negan are currently getting a spin-off titled The Walking Dead: Dead City.
Dead City. I want to talk about the news sometime. Dead City might actually be good.
That's a terrible title, by the way. That will be set in New York, and there are like 3 or 4 other series in the works. Rick Grimes comes back in the finale for the first time since his departure at the beginning of Season 9, but he's not really coming back for the finale. It's just a teaser for his spin-off with Michonne that's coming out later next year. And even that is an example of how shady and disrespectful of the audience AMC can be. In case you don't know, for the quick backstory, Andrew Lincoln, who plays Rick Grimes, wanted to leave the show at the end of Season 8. He wasn't enjoying it as much, which is understandable.
Fun fact, apparently he was talking about leaving the show in Season 4. So, that's wild.
Understandable, because Seasons 7 and 8 were a very low point for the show. His contract was up at the end of Season 8, and he also got tired of living so far away from his wife and kids. The show shot in Georgia, but Andrew Lincoln is British, and his family lived in England. So, at the end of Season 8, he was gonna leave. There was a whole setup for his exit, with the now infamous flash forward from the beginning of Season 8 showing Rick...
Oh yeah, so reportedly this is where there was an ending where he is rescued by a helicopter here, apparently.
Dying next to a tree, which was
Oh, dying is another different version I've heard. I've heard that he was going to be rescued there.
Confirmed by Andrew Lincoln himself to be a setup for the end of Rick's story, because he initially asked for the writers to kill him off. Except, AMC somehow convinced him to stay for another 5 episodes in Season 9 so they can...
You want to know the somehow? They gave him like, I think it was a ridiculous amount of money.
...a proper proper send-off.
That
The
somehow.
flash forward was later retcon and turned out to be somewhat of a fake-out, and now the end of Rick's story was the primary focus of the first part of the following season. It's important to note that the whole marketing campaign for Season 9 was about Rick's final episode.
Which is dumb.
That's all they talked about. It was in the trailers, it was on the posters, and Drew Lincoln did a bunch of events and interviews saying goodbye to the fans.
I mean, smart from a marketing point of view, but it's dumb.
The show meant to him. And people were really sad to see him go, me included. This was kind of a big deal. I mean, since day one, The Walking Dead had been the story of Rick Grimes, so people were sad to know the story was going to be moving past him, but were still curious to see how things would end for him, especially after all the public farewells they'd seen from Andrew and AMC. It was difficult to accept, but everyone came to terms with it and was ready to say goodbye. But then, his final episode came out, and Rick's exit turned out to be another bizarre fake-out death ending with a cliffhanger that left everybody really confused, only for Scott Gimple to immediately announce on the Talking Dead after show that
Movies.
this entire thing was
Next year.
actually another big trick.
3
This
movies.
wasn't the big farewell we had been conditioned to accept. Rick wasn't actually going away forever, he was just being sent off to a spin-off Rick Grimes movie trilogy. And the first 5 episodes
There it is.
of Season 9 were essentially a build-up to that announcement. This reveal was met with a lot of backlash, frustration, and a lack of excitement that took Scott Gimple and AMC a bit by surprise. This was one too many times that the audience had been tricked by the people behind the show in a very unpleasant way. They tried to build some hype for the Rick Grimes movies, but they never really got the excitement.
To be fair, I don't think, like, we never really got to see the hype, not just because of, obviously, him leaving and everything like that, but also because this was, like, right around COVID, right? So Season 10 is the one that caught the brunt of it, but the reason why I think the movies were, like, pushed down the road massively is because they literally couldn't even film them even if they wanted to. So, you know.
They were looking for. I think this might have caused them to panic a bit behind the scenes, because then those Rick Grimes movies got stuck in development hell for like 4 years, a period that was only made worse by the pandemic. They never really figured out what they wanted those movies to be, which was very apparent when interviews of Scott or creator Robert Kirkman led to questions
Oh,
about the pro-
Robert Kirkman, man, would I love to talk to him. I think he's not on very good terms with AMC, to be honest with you. He's suing them, I think. That lawsuit might have ended by now, but I know he was suing AMC. So, man, I would love to talk to Kirkman about it. If only. Someday, surely. Thank you for the kind words.
project. When asked about updates on the Rick films years after their announcement, they still seem to be in early stages of the process with no sign of a production start, and they always gave very vague and confused answers that brought nothing concrete to the table. Long story short, the movies never got off the ground for the entire 4 years that followed their announcement. 4 years after which these movies were scrapped and reworked into a Rick and Michonne TV spin-off that's now slated to come out in 2024. And that's the only reason why Rick and Michonne reappear in the series finale of the original show. Not to actually have anything to do with the story ending, because it's not ending, but just to remind the audience that their spin-off is on the way. And that's what frustrates me so much. The Walking Dead finale is not a finale. It's just a transition point. It's a scam. It makes you feel like the show tricked you for 12 years. People invested so much into this show. The Walking Dead had a very loyal audience, but Scott Gimple and AMC always chose to take advantage of that with little to no shame. They never tried to do anything for the audience.
I'm having a bit of a introspective moment now. I'm kind of sad.
They're so
All over
desperate to
again.
make this franchise a thing, they're ready to pull anything to achieve it, and it's really unfortunate to see. And it's also not like it's really been working. AMC has been trying to keep
That's the thing. Like, it literally doesn't work. This is what boggles my mind. Tales of the Walking Dead. Literally no one cared. Like, I'm gonna be honest, I watched the whole thing. It didn't seem like people cared at all. That was like a relatively new thing, right? They tried Fear the Walking Dead. Fear the Walking Dead's ending. Okay, fine. World Beyond. I sleep. They just need to do something new.
Dead universe
Can we stop with this insane universe that's never gonna happen?
Better part of a decade now, and it's never truly worked out for them. Fear the Walking Dead, the first spin-off the show ever had, is the most successful venture the franchise has
It was the most successful venture.
had aside from the original show. It's about to end with its 7th season, I think, and everything I hear about
8.
it is negative. It seems like people have not liked this show in a really long time, and people who watch it seem to be just as annoyed with it as people were with the original show in season 7.
I think people are a lot more annoyed with Fear than they are with the main show, to be honest. Maybe like Carl's death is on par with the hate of Fear.
Personally gave up on Fear the Walking Dead about halfway through its 2nd season, so I'm not really concerned.
He didn't see
But
the
I
best
don't know
part.
anyone who
He didn't
watches
see the best
show
part.
and maybe that's why it's ending. Then there is The Walking Dead World Beyond.
I sleep.
Drama take on the zombie apocalypse that was just really bad. Nobody really watched it. It ended after 2 seasons, and the only relevant moments it had were one scene that vaguely mentioned Rick Grimes and the post-credit scene of the series finale that teases a theory that the apocalypse might have started in France. And it also shows the possibility of more variant zombies that are more aggressive and that can run and hit, which is something that probably will play out in some way in the Daryl show because it takes place in Paris. But all in all, World Beyond was an insanely forgettable show that never really found an...
Is anyone ever going to watch World Beyond for the 2nd time? I think how do I put this? I think the best thing to come out of World Beyond is potentially a fan edit of them taking all the CRM scenes and putting them together. I would assume they're about 15 minutes, maybe, out of the 2... No, actually, probably a little bit more. Probably like 20 minutes of CRM lore. Rest of World Beyond, I sleep. It was so... I really didn't like it. There was literally like 2 characters that were decent.
It disappeared as quickly as it arrived.
So bad.
And finally, last year, we had Tales of the Walking Dead, an anthology spin-off series that came and went so fast that most people are not aware that this show even exists. It was an underwhelming mess that didn't really know what to do with its vast realm of possibilities. It went largely unnoticed, and the few people who did watch it didn't like it all that much. And I think this show especially...
It was very
is
hit
a
and miss.
great vision of the state of the franchise right now. For what seems like an entire decade, the Walking Dead franchise has been in this perpetual state of throwing everything at the wall as it desperately hopes that something sticks. And unfortunately for them, none of it has really been working out the way they want. I mean, excuse the shitty pun, but The Walking Dead has been in a state of decay for like 5 or 6 years now. Actually, I don't apologize for that pun, I stand by it. And it looks like AMC is just reaching and reaching to try and bring the franchise back to its 2015-ish glory. But man, that's long gone. The fact that they're ready to ruin all of their iconic characters for the sake of milking this franchise with no end in sight is really sad. I'm sure I'll get curious and check out the Daryl show and the Rick and Michonne show. I don't know if I'm gonna stick with them, but right now I don't see any hype for any of those spin-offs.
There really isn't. This is like coming from someone who is literally in the community 24/7. It feels like no one cares about them. Like, there are obviously a few people very excited, especially about the Dead City news that we're getting right now. Is this spoilers? It's not really spoilers. We just heard that Stephen Ogg is going to return to the spin-off, and like, you know me, Trevor in The Walking Dead, sign me up. Let's see what it's all about. And then there's a bunch of news about the main antagonist of the series as well. And honestly, Dead City is sounding decent. We'll see what happens. Let's not get our hopes up. Let's play it safe. It's looking decent. The rest, though, and obviously I'm going to watch the Rick spin-off, but...
Out this year. That's kind of crazy when you think about it. I don't know, it just feels so disappointing to invest over a decade into a show that never wanted to end, only to then bait the small amount of people that remain faithful to the show into watching other stuff if they want a definitive ending that is not even guaranteed. I really wanted the final season to prove me wrong for quitting on the show in season 10, to prove to everyone who quit on the show along the way that sticking with it would have been worth it, but I feel like it achieved the opposite. It proved everyone right. It proved to me, and to the 94% of the colossal audience that quit, that being so invested into this story and these characters is not worth it. I've talked about it at length on the channel, but I'm always wary of stories that make it very clear they have no end in sight, and that's what The Walking Dead is now. It's a story that keeps going just for the sake of it, and more often than not, these stories keep going until nobody wants to watch them anymore, and then it ends in a bit of a dud that, by default, cannot be satisfying to anyone. And it's a sad fate for a show that once was a cultural phenomenon of a scale we had never really seen before. In a meta way, you could say that the franchise itself
Became
is
The Walking
real
Dead.
Walking Dead. Okay, that wasn't my best joke, but please subscribe. There's almost 500,000 of us in here.
He hit
I don't
500K.
know what The Walking Dead will evolve
We're
into.
good.
I genuinely don't. But I doubt this franchise will ever become the popular cinematic universe the creators desperately want it to be. If it ever had the potential to, I think that ship sailed like 7 or 8 years ago at the very least.
The
At the end of
problem
the
with
day,
making it a universe... Okay, we'll talk
it's
about it
show
in a
that was
second.
ruined
Let's
by
finish the video.
greed of the people making it. People who chose a corporate route of banking on never-ending build-up to milk this franchise for everything it has. They turned it into this long, overly dragged-out story that feels like it's constantly building towards something that never happens. I will always remember the early seasons fondly, not only for what they were, but for all the moments it brought me and my friends and family as we all experienced it together. But every time I look at it, just like a lot of people out there,
It's
I cannot help
makes me
but see
sad.
what The Walking Dead really is. The greatest fall from grace in television history.
That was a good video. That was a really, really good video. I agree with most points here. Probably all of them actually, because I think he sort of talked about exactly what I talked about in the 6 Reasons video as well. Obviously, I didn't know about the ending. The ending is a huge one. But basically, if you want to hear... Oh, let me link the video in chat real quick. If somebody wants to drop him a sub, he is a variety creator, so he covers a bunch of stuff. I watched his Flash video, for example. That's the first one I watched. Flash is another series that I watched out of the sunk cost fallacy, basically. I finally dropped it, though. I did drop it, ultimately. I think it's still going, though. It was also very, very bad. Anyway, first of all, I think The Walking Dead will never become a universe because the tone of the series is all over the place. It misses the grit that was there. Seasons 11 and 10, despite the dark story material, compared to seasons 3 and 4, it literally feels like a PG-13 version of the show. And that is odd. First of all, most characters have plot armor thicker than steel. And second of all, it just... Again, it doesn't have that grit. And I'm not talking about the camera grit, which people keep going on and on about. If you didn't know, the first, how many seasons? I think it was 4 or 5. The first seasons were filmed on film, and the others were filmed digitally. And people don't like digital. I sort of get that, but I'm not talking about that here. I'm talking about sort of the grit of the story. Also, another thing. I feel like the very title of The Walking Dead is very oversaturated right now. And people just don't care about it because it's another thing. Walking Dead. People just don't care. People who drop the show won't start watching the show. And people who are watching the show may literally just start to fizzle out. Because there's just too much of it, right? And if you want to keep up with everything, it sort of starts to have this weird FOMO feeling. Where you're like, well, I have to watch it. But then you don't watch it, now you feel bad. A show shouldn't make you feel bad because you don't watch it, is what I'm saying. Honestly... If I had to give advice to whoever's at AMC, first of all, stop making 50 shows. No one cares. Number 2, take a break. Let it just chill. Let The Walking Dead title just chill for a bit. And then write something new. Make something new. Don't play it safe. Do something big. Do something new. Give us a new group. Whether they become villains or something like that. I keep going on about this villains thing because I really want to see it. Make it new. Don't sit in a forest. I don't know, maybe do it in a wintry time. I don't know. Maybe do it not in the desert, because deserts are boring. Do it somewhere else. Do it with a new group, with a new set of characters that are not connected to the main cast, because again, it feels cheap. It feels frankly unrealistic in many ways that all of these characters just so happen to cross paths. And show us the beginning, basically, is what I would say. Let's go back to basics. It's a trope to say let's go back to basics, but with The Walking Dead, I really do think that going back to basics is what they should do, and that is unfortunate because it definitely does not seem like they're going to be doing that. It's a very, very good video though. I very much recommend everyone watch this. Oh boy, that made me kind of sad. I've been saying this in the retrospectives as well, but the nostalgic feeling I get from watching like some of the older seasons is so sad. It's so sad. And now we're going to be going into season 10 very soon with the retrospectives, and that's when I feel like the show gets very, very messy. I still like it, because of course I do, but you know.